Oh, some really good water. Okay. They're just doing a test run right now. I can't tell you how many takes it's been trying to get the perfect frame. So that's like take 30 something. Today we're talking about conscious and subconscious and awareness. Because a lot of people like to believe that it's one thing, and they're not wrong. Because if everything is one, then it's just another layer of truth. But it's important to dissect what we call oneness and analyze its layers. Because a lot of people run with an answer and call it finality or a destination, but perhaps that is their capacity already. This is take 38. This is a very complex topic because a lot of people stop at a destination and call it answer, because people often use the word consciousness, subconscious, and awareness as if they're the same thing. So here's a question. I'm just going to jump right into it. If things are happening before you're aware of them, then what exactly is awareness? Some people would say, well, awareness is paying attention. Fair enough. But who? Who is paying attention? A thought appears, then you notice it. But if you notice the thought, then wouldn't the thought exist before you noticed it? So what encountered it first? The subconscious? Perhaps. We often describe the subconscious as the part of us that store memory, forms habit, processes information, and drives beneath conscious awareness. Which raises a difficult question though, because why do we assume that consciousness is the source? Perhaps consciousness is not the source. Perhaps consciousness is the witness, the narrator, the thing that arrives afterward and says, wait, this happened. And perhaps awareness is something different still, because people can be conscious without being aware. They repeat patterns for years without even noticing. People fall in love without realizing. People suffer without understanding why. So something is happening. And then awareness catches it. It's almost as if awareness is consciousness becoming conscious of itself, which leads to the central question. Because why does awareness always seem to arrive after something has already begun? So perhaps consciousness is not the beginning. Perhaps consciousness is simply the moment the beginning becomes visible. And if consciousness arrives after the experience begins, then another possibility appears. So maybe consciousness interprets experience more often than it creates it. All right. Like, think about emotions. How often do people say, I can't explain it, or it was just a feeling? Why? Because something was understood before it could articulate itself. Something was known before it was explained. A person can walk in a room and immediately feel uncomfortable. Only later they search for a reason to why they were uncomfortable. A person fall in love, like I said, before even realizing they've fallen. Like you, me, we've all been guilty of trusting, of having fears, desires, missing someone long before we even understand why. The feeling appears first, the exploration appears later, like a delay. And perhaps that's what time is. Perhaps the delay between the conscious mind and the subconscious, perhaps that is what time is. And time allows paradox to exist. Let me touch on a little about instincts, right? Because maybe instincts are pointing towards something even stranger. And this is power, the ability to exercise the mind critically. Holding that capacity is the power. So oftentimes I'm gonna be lost into the rabbit hole. So wherever you are with me, that's where we at. Okay. So I get lost in the best way and the worst. But let's touch on instinct a little bit because I think it bleeds into this theory of mine where consciousness, subconscious, and awareness breathe. So let's touch on instinct because instinct is not unique to humans. Obviously, birds migrate across continents, fish navigates throughout oceans, animals sense danger before it even become visible. We already know how the instincts of animals are, yet none of them stop to even explain themselves. The bird does not construct a philosophy migration before migration. A deer doesn't formulate a theory before running. Something moves, something knows, something responds, and only afterwards do we attempt to explain it. This raises an unsettling possibility. Perhaps consciousness is not the first form of knowing. Perhaps it's the first form of knowing that can speak. Instinct act, emotions feel, intuition recognizes, consciousness explains. So maybe consciousness has been mistaken, or maybe consciousness has mistaken itself for the author because it's the part capable of telling the story. But telling a story is not the same as writing it. Perhaps consciousness is not the author, perhaps it's the interpreter. And if awareness reveals things that were already happening before we noticed them, then another question appears. Can consciousness, or not consciousness, but can awareness interfere with the very thing that reveals? Like, think about confidence. This is something that I've thought about deeply, where many say, oh, you're confident. But oftentimes I'm like, why do I have to be confident? Why can I just not exist without being placed with the label of being confident? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, why can I just exist without being confident? So, what is confident? You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's, I've thought about it deeply because people often describe confidence as self awareness, self assurance, But truly, confident people rarely seem occupied with their confidence. You get what I'm saying? It's like they speak without monitoring every word. They move without even analyzing every moment or every movement. I mean, they just exist without constantly having to check themselves. And the confidence is often visible to everyone before it becomes visible to the confident person, which raises a strange possibility again, because perhaps confidence is not heightened self awareness. Perhaps confidence is a freedom from excessive self awareness, because the moment awareness begins to observe itself, something changes. The singer starts thinking about how they're singing, the dancer start thinking about dancing, the speaker start thinking about how they're speaking or what they're saying. What one what is like what I'm saying is what once emerged naturally from what simply is, now becomes performance, because now you are aware of it, monitoring it almost. And the subconscious generated the whole thing, because consciousness is attempting to manage, organize, and in doing so, it alters it. This is why recognition feels so powerful, not because recognition creates identity, but because recognition reveals what identity was already expressing beneath awareness. The complement does not create the quality, it illuminates it, just as a flashlight reveals a room without building the room. And maybe this explains even flow states, because during a flow state, self awareness recedes, time distorts, action becomes effortless, the musician becomes the music, the writer becomes the words, the athlete becomes the movement. The distinction between observer and observed begins to dissolve. The person is no longer watching themselves exist, they're simply existing, which creates a paradox. If awareness brings us closer to ourselves, why do some of our most authentic moments happens when awareness fades into the background? Perhaps awareness is not the destination. Perhaps awareness is the doorway. And once the doorway is open, it must eventually be stepped through. Because maybe authenticity, that's such a that word, now that I'm saying it, it makes me feel like that's not how it's supposed to be pronounced. Authenticity. City. But anyways, what I'm saying is maybe authenticity is not found in endlessly observing ourselves, but maybe it's found in becoming so immersed in being ourselves that consciousness no longer feels the need to watch. And there's a lot of things that I want to touch on, like uh, um, light, because I touched on um, where many say we are consciousness, right? It's just the same as when someone says we are light and stop there. Because why assume consciousness is the deepest layer? Why assume awareness is the final answer? Why assume light is more fundamental than darkness? Perhaps we associate consciousness with light because consciousness illuminates, it reveals, it recognizes, it makes the unseen visible. But recognition is not origin. A flashlight can illuminate a room, but it cannot build the room. So if consciousness illuminates experience, how do we know consciousness created experience? And if consciousness discovers itself, how do we know consciousness arrived first? The deeper consciousness looks, the more difficult it becomes to locate a true beginning. That is why the subconscious appears before the consciousness. Awareness appears after consciousness, and then awareness begins observing itself. The observer becomes the observed, the answer becomes the question, and the question becomes the answer. You know that saying that says, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I've always found that question interesting, not because of the chicken or not because of the egg, but because of what the question is doing. Most people hear that question and immediately start looking for an answer. But even if you answer it, another question appears. If the chicken came first, where did the chicken come from? If the egg came first, where did the egg came from? The answer doesn't end the question, it extends the question. Maybe that's why I keep asking who arrived first? The subconscious, consciousness, awareness? Because even if I chose one, another question immediately follows. Perhaps consciousness mistakes itself for the source because it's the very thing doing the questioning. But but questioning something isn't the same as creating it. Does that make sense? A flashlight can illuminate a room, like I said, but that doesn't mean it built the room. So if consciousness only arrives after the thought, feeling, instinct, and recognition, why do we continue treating consciousness as origin? Perhaps consciousness is the search. And if we are the question, then every answer is just another way of asking. Because the moment intelligence keep asking the question, certainty begins to disappear. Instinct moves, consciousness wonders, instinct act, consciousness doubt. Instinct knows, consciousness seek to know. So perhaps that is why consciousness continually encounters mystery. Not because reality lacks answer, but because consciousness is the part of reality that arrived asking for them.